So hi everyone. I work in a school called Creative, and I teach language and humanities for grades 8, 9 and 10. So I just need to explain what I mean by language and humanities. So I teach English language, and when I say humanities, it can be a very broad spectrum. So to me, in terms of just working the class, I'm just using history and civics textbooks, mostly the NCERT textbooks and other material, as I see useful at that time. And in terms of humanities, what I'm trying to work with the children is to think about individuals and their relationship to society. So when I say that, the kind of thinking that we are trying to get the children to have is that there are structures of society and there's the individual, but there are ways that a child can feel empowered in spite of all the structures around them, right? To be able to deal with those structures in society. And then the study of humanities to fulfill the aims of education. In our university, we were constantly talking about the aims of education, and a couple of them have gotten into my head, and they are a constant theme in every class that I worry about, in the sense that the two words that I have in my head are autonomy and compassion. So essentially, when I say these two words, I'm thinking about whether the child gets a sense of being able to think and decide for himself, and at the same time have compassion for others who are working with him and around him. So these are the ways in which when I go into a class and work with the children, these are the ways that I think about the study of language and humanities, right? And this was my first year of teaching, like teaching in a proper classroom. So it was, I think it's an experience that doesn't happen because you're so empty, right? You don't have any preconceived notions about what should happen in a class. And I think it's a lovely year because I can already feel that when I'm going to the next year, I'm a little more, like he says, rehearsed, right? I'm a little more, I feel a little more fake, and I'm hoping that every day I'll be able to go in and get empty again. But these were the ideas that I went into the class with. I'm also trying to become an evangelist of sorts for NCERT textbooks, because they are just such an amazing resource, and they're just sitting there. There are PDFs that are available. You can go to something called NoteMonk and download all of these, and they are an excellent resource. They are so well thought out, and I don't know how many schools do use them, but they are just, I found them so useful because everything is kind of laid out for the teacher to use in the classroom. As you can see, that's actually the main book that I used this year for my grades 9 and 8. They came in for the humanities class, and they don't answer an exam. So this class of mine doesn't answer an exam, so that means it's awesome, right? Because I don't have an agenda for the exam. I'm pretty free to do whatever I like. But we do see the humanities curriculum as embedded in the language, learning language. So that means that if I have some aims of language education for my children, I can use the humanities curriculum towards those aims, and I will explain what I mean by that. The other pieces are that these are the other books that are available, and this doesn't show you, but the NCERT texts keep having this idea of source. This is the source that shows you this. This is the source that says this. So the children are constantly in the frame of thinking about perspectives, right? So which is one very important theme in working with a humanities curriculum. So what I'm trying to talk about now is to say that I used the NCERT texts over a year, and these were the anchors in my classroom, and I had other peripheral pieces, but I found these to be very useful resources. So what I had was, I started off with Peasants and Farmers, and the reason we started with this was we were also doing from till September, we did a seed to table Mela for the children. So they were working with soil, plants, learning how to grow stuff, learning how it goes into the kitchen. And while we were doing that, it seemed to be very right to do a theme on peasants and farmers and look at broader global perspectives of what's happening in terms of peasants and farmers. So this is a very lovely chapter that actually talks about farmers in the US, about ideas in England, where the ideas of commons, of having common lakes, common land, how to use it, and then the struggle between people who want to take bits of those and go with the agenda of profit. And then there was the opium trade piece. So these were three themes that we worked with in the class, and how we did was we had different groups work with one part of the text. So one group worked with the opium trade, one group worked with the idea of commons, and the one group worked with the Dust Bowl idea in the US. And obviously the connects come when you start thinking of the opium trade, for example, and you start thinking, okay, well, there was the opium trade going on, and why was that happening? Because there was the idea of selling tea, of buying tea, selling tea, but then what do we sell in lieu of the trade for tea? So we go and dump opium in China, but who will grow the opium for us? And that becomes the Indian farmer, and therefore the Indian farmer is a middleman. Those kind of questions come up during the classroom, right? And then when we talked about the Dust Bowl, the idea of if you go too far, too soon with mechanization, what happens to the soil, right? And while they're working with soil themselves, there is such a connect to that big, broad theme about what's happening in the world. So these were kind of themes that we had, and the my main attempt was to say, this is something we are studying about in the text, but it still has relevance to what we are seeing around us. So when we talked about the farmers who are looking at the commons, then the idea of how are we using the lakes, what's happening to the lakes in Bangalore, some thought about that could come into the discussion. Who owns the lakes? Those are common property, but who owns it? So connect to the world around you and what's happening was some discussion that happened in the classroom. These are the texts that I used over the year, and actually I've realized that I tried to cover a lot, and probably next year I'll do lesser, but these are kids that I have a small class, so it's kind of easy to do a lot with them, because I'm able to kind of sense whether they are with it, and they are also used to having a lot done, because we have almost a 2-hour slot for doing humanities, so there's lots that can get done with that. We did the history of clothing and the history of cricket. I don't know if you have seen these texts, if anybody has seen these. These are really lovely pieces, because the history of clothing actually talks about things that are very real, right? How did people start wearing saris? What happened when the British came in? The confusion within people, whether if I have a turban and I enter a space, do I remove the turban? Do I wear shoes? Don't I wear shoes? Should I stick to the norms of the West, or should I stick to the norms of the East? Those kinds of questions were brought about through the text. History of cricket, you have that's always a favorite, but the ideas of caste, gender, who gets to play, do women get to play, all those questions also came through in the history of cricket. So these two are really beautiful texts that any child can kind of connect to, because they are things that you do every day, right? You have clothing and you have cricket, and you have to work with those. After doing these three, then we moved during the last few months. We did the French Revolution, the Russian Revolution, the World War I and World War II. And of course, when it comes to the World War, they think it's fun because it's tanks and submarines and planes. So, it's lots of machinery. So people think it's a lot of fun. The kids think it's really cool. But then when you actually start working through it, then we come through serious issues. So that was an interesting piece that came out. But really in teen language, to me, these NCERT texts really rocked. They were really wonderful. So now I will just try to think, talk about what I tried to do in class to a set of students who I think are very lucky. They are very resource rich, and they have been exposed to tons of good stuff. So they're very blasé about everything. After some time, they're like, oh, auntie, we've done this before. I mean, like, shall we do it in a different way? So they're a set of children who are very, they're accustomed to seeing a lot. And so the tendency to say, oh, shall we do another way, is there. To me, the texts are itself very exciting, but for the children, probably, they're used to a very visual media, and so they do like a lot of visual stuff going on in the classroom versus too much text, right? So that's one understanding that I had. During when we studied the French Revolution, I asked each of the children to just come forward and become one person in the French Revolution. Louis XVI, one person became Marie Antoinette, one person is a revolutionary, one person is a peasant, one person is a woman, and they make a short speech and put themselves in the shoes of that person and enact that speech. So that was the idea of teaching perspective, that history is not about the kings, what happened to the kings and queens only, it's also about what happened to everybody in that French Revolution. For them, in fact, there are lots of videos around. So there was this, I think it was a Salman Academy, right, video, where they showed that the king and the queen tried to run away from the Palace of Versailles, and then they were caught and they were brought back, and somehow that image stuck to the kids, that they were trying to run away, they were kings and queens, and then they dressed as their servants and tried to come back. And that, I know, when they wrote the reflection, some children wrote about that they were trying to run away, and I think the idea of the king and queen being so helpless was very interesting to them. The other things that I tried was I used Prezi. Prezi, one of our classmates when we were in college, introduced us to Prezi. It's very simple, it's very visual, and it just, you have a few pictures coming in, very little text, unlike what I've done with PowerPoint right now. But it's very visual, and so it really helped. I have that if someone wants to see it at the end of the session, but I used it to just capture the key points at the end of the whole class, to just say, this is what we really did, we covered these few points. Then after reading the creation of the Constitution in the French Revolution, we watched parts of Samvidhan, the making of the Indian Constitution. You would have heard about this, this serial that was going on. And we just did a little, like 20 minutes of it, just to see that the problem of creating the Constitution there and the problem of creating a Constitution here, it's all about different groups trying to get a voice in, getting power, right? And so the children at this age, 8th and 9th, especially the 9th, have been exposed to a lot of ideas, and these ideas about power and struggles were not alien to them. They were something that they seemed to get, at least in the 9th grade. It was not as if it was too far beyond their, understanding. So this piece especially, with the visual learners, I have one boy in my class who's very visual, and for him I think it was very useful to have this going on. And this was the idea, I'm saying, what I'm trying to connect to is why do this? Why do this activity? When I use this, the idea is let's connect to our context. This is the French Revolution, it happened far away, but it's still relevant to our life. Then when we did the history of cricket, there was, in the text itself, there was this persuasive essay that said, Gandhi said, if you're a farmer, you're really fine in terms of, you're stronger than a sportsman who's playing cricket. And so they had to take the stance and say, okay, is a farmer stronger and fitter than a sportsman? Let's argue that in the form of a persuasive essay. So basically the language curriculum came into that, and the children wrote down, okay. And one of the boys is actually trying to become a footballer, and his father is a farmer. So I think it was a kind of moment for him, thinking, oh, is my father that cool? Really? Is he stronger? Are you really stronger and fitter if you go to a gym, or if you do housework? Those kinds of discussions came about. Then when we did World War I, we did a lot of charts. So, and then I just said, we'll do why did it happen, what happened, where did it happen, when did it happen, and how did it happen. So that's one piece that we did. Then we used different texts so that you got different perspectives. So one was from the perspective of the US itself when they entered into World War I, one which was a very broad timeline, and one which was kind of specific. So they got different texts and they had to work with it. There was a lot of energy in doing the charts together. So they had to learn how to work in teams and reconcile to their different styles. So that happened. What was very nice for the 9th grade was that we were doing in parallel, while we were doing this World War II, we were doing The Book Thief, which is a story of a German girl during this time period. And so it was very real then to see what happens when someone is going through a war, what happens to their lives. So I think that connect from it being a very global perspective to what happens in a person's day-to-day life when they do that, when they are in a war, I think kind of for the 9th grade was really good. And at the end of the year, after doing all this stuff, they wrote summaries of their understanding of the text and they shared their insights from the readings. So again, how do I tie it to the aims of language learning? Is asking questions, different perspectives, connecting to their lives. And the most important, I think, is to have an original voice, right? To be able to get big themes and to have an original voice to say that your opinion about this whole thing that you've read and studied matters, and what is your perspective? What did you get from it? So this is what Karan, grade 8, wrote about World War I. He said, World War I started because a Serbian assassinated a to-be ruler of Austria. And then he writes, my response to this is that all the countries are stupid. This is my response because this is how I used to fight in 5th grade. I would jump into other fights which weren't mine, or others would jump into fights which weren't theirs, making it a very big problem like a massacre. And then we had Ninad, whose father actually works with the chief minister. So our man is very up to date on politics and political scenarios. So his thinking is pretty, evolved on that. So he writes essentially, this is a long piece, but essentially he says here that this revolution did influence us to think about democracy, equality and rights. But I feel the power to control and run a state or a region or even a country doesn't lie in its citizens' hands. I wouldn't want to say democracy didn't make much of an impact, but I would like to say that the system of monarchy has resisted it all these years. It is a simple psychological factor playing in mankind's mind. It is the hunger for power or dominance of every individual that makes the power of monarchy thrive everywhere. Eventually, only one single individual has to win, and only that single individual enjoys all the power and exploits it ruthlessly. So it was very thoughtful. I thought it was like, man, I never thought, I would never be able to do this in 8th or 9th grade. This is a lot of thinking, but it's also the scenario in which he's growing up. He's very aware of what's happening in his household. And this is my Amal, who refuses to read and write, but he'll do any pictorial, the farmer's son. And so he'll come, and then his visuals are awesome. So he did this whole Bastille, storming of the Bastille. And then he did the idea of bread, and then the queen told the people to eat cake and not bread. So he got that, and then he drew that. But his drawing, even in class, for the opium trade, he drew 3 visuals, and it's stuck in all of our heads because he just put those 3 pieces like India, China, England. He put those visuals, and we were like, okay, we totally get it. We don't have to say anything more. 3 pictures, and that's it. He comes to class just to listen and just refuses to speak, which is fine by me. So from this, obviously, we learn more than the children. I think the children learn, but we learn more, right? The big emerging themes for me was the idea of when I looked at World War I and World War II, because I was also doing this very fresh. I'm not like trained history teacher, so all of this was fresh to me and it was great fun doing it. But it was very scary to see what was happening there, and I felt a sense of seeing that happening in front of me every day here, right? The idea of nation states, all of them squabbling amongst them, and things happening because of rumors and rumor mongering, right? Out of fears, okay, Britain feels this is what Germany is doing, Germany feels this is what France is doing. So many things going on amongst the states, just like how Karan said, 5th grade kids, worrying about my friend, if he's your friend, then he's not, he's my enemy and therefore you're not my friend, all kinds of stuff going on like that. Very narrow definitions of nationalism, right, when we did Hitler. So the ideas that he propagated, and this chapter on Hitler is written beautifully, and how he actually created this whole propaganda machine using words and symbols, that came out very well, and very narrow definitions of nationalism. Money and desire for power as drivers, those were big themes. And especially in the book Thief, the idea of the use of words and symbols to create a new reality, that was very powerful for the children also to understand that there can be words and symbols can be used to create an idea of a reality that everyone can swallow, and there have to be a few individuals who get them and ask really why and what can I do to be empowered. So those were the big things that came. And one aha moment for me personally was when, I had not realized fully that Hitler, for instance, was a product of the First World War. He was a corporal in the First World War, and he went through a lot of hate, and he was, the First World War was not glamorous, it was trench warfare, right? So there was this whole idea of people struggling through lice, through mud, through water, to kill sometimes walk over their own fellow men and shoot somebody. People came back very bitter, and they had been sent with this idea that they're fighting for the nation, and actually sometimes they died of dysentery. It was not funny, right? It was not heroic at all, and they came back with a lot of hate, and perhaps that translated into some of the things that happened later. So those were very interesting things for me to look at in a little more depth. And I'm not saying I condone what I thought of Hitler, when I think of Hitler, what he did, but a little bit of more, not compassion, but some other word maybe, for even someone who's considered evil like him. I could understand what happened in the First World War when we looked at the details of what happened then. So these were the learnings that I had for myself. So this is a little bit of a broad sweep, but it was just great fun. My learning from this year is to actually do a little lesser and then do it much more in depth. But the children are fine. I mean, they are used to a lot of stuff, and they're fine doing it. So we'll see. Every day is a new day. Yeah, thank you.